Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you might be. So glad to have you here. I'm Brian Toll. Welcome to this workshop put on by IoT Central. Today's topic is Show Me the Money, Developing a Value Proposition, an IoT Value Proposition and Business Model. So this is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be very interactive, and I'm really glad that you could come along today. With us today is my colleague, Marcy Palmer. It is a live workshop, and there's going to be a number of opportunities for you guys to ask some questions throughout the hour together. So if you haven't used GoToMeeting before, there is a Q&A section. I encourage you to take a minute and kind of find that if you want to ask some questions. And with that, we're going to dive right in. Real briefly on a little bit about Spindance. We're a consultancy focused on IoT. We help organizations on their entire journey through the IoT process, from identifying how they should use the technology to developing value props. That's why we're here today. And then develop the actual software for that. We're kind of an end-to-end, we're a full stack IoT shop. We have embedded, cloud, mobile, web, and machine learning experts all on staff. So pretty much all the software that you would ever need for an IoT product or solution we can provide. So anyways, that's a little bit about us. Again, really glad to have you here, and we are going to dive right in. And the first thing that we're going to do, it's over to you. If you all want to grab some pencil and maybe some paper, maybe pull up a file on your computer, we're going to be going through some material, and then I'll be asking you to kind of spend some time doing a little work on your own. So now would be a good time to pull that up. While you're doing that, if you could also maybe think about one or two initiatives that you want to focus on. These could be existing IoT products that you have in the market. They could be products that you're currently developing. Maybe you're responsible for internal initiatives. Maybe you're doing Industry 4.0 or asset tracking, logistics, something like that. Something that you're not selling, but something that your organization uses. Whatever it might be, why don't you take a minute to just kind of think about that and jot it down. If you got a few, maybe just jot those down, and you can definitely use the tools that we're going to give you today for multiple things. So take a 20 seconds, 30 seconds here and jot those down. All righty, hopefully you found, excuse me, that pen and paper. And we're going to dive right in. And I'm going to start with a question. We're going to kind of keep it rhetorical, but it's kind of important. Why do products fail? And as we do consulting in the IoT space, we've spent a lot of time thinking about this because we've seen a lot of projects fail. We've seen a lot of projects come through our door that we need to recover. And I think it's really good to think about this, because if you know why something fails, then you can sidestep all those problems and make it better. So this is kind of the background for today, and I want to pull up a couple of statistics here, and they're not terribly great. We're going to kind of start with the challenge ahead of us, and we're going to try to work our way through that. So this is some statistics from Cisco. It's a little bit old, and I think we're in a little bit better space in the industry, but I still think it's important to understand this, that about 75% of IoT projects just outright fail. They never make it to production. When they do make it to production, only about 85% of executives are unhappy with those outcomes. If you flip that around, only 15% of execs are pleased with the budget, the timeline, and the end results. If we take a step back, this is another data point I find really fascinating, that only about 72% of projects deliver on customer expectations. That means if you're putting something out there and the customer is really interested in it, they buy it, and they bring it home, and they start to use it, or maybe it's a B2B product and they bring it into their enterprise, they're not terribly happy with the outcome. There's some gap, there's some problem that they had with that. So if we drill into IoT and we think specifically about why IoT projects fail, a gentleman, Daniel Elzada, he's a thought leader in industry, just a really nice guy. I encourage you to check out his website. He did a survey of his community a while back and identified 8 of the top reasons why IoT projects fail. And what's fascinating about this to me is that if we look at this, it's only the first and the eighth one that are actually technology related. The first there is scaling the IoT solution, and the last one is understanding how all the IoT building blocks fit together. As a software guy, it really disappoints me that number one is the biggest challenge, because it shouldn't be. In this day and age, there's no reason why you can't architect a scalable solution. If you don't have a scalable solution, there was some fundamental problem in the architecture, but we're at the point where that really shouldn't be a problem. But regardless, if you look at the list, the second through the seventh are more related around the business side, around the value proposition side. So number two there is making money with IoT. That's a challenge. Finding product market fit. That's the process of really fine-tuning your product so it really hits home with the audience. That's a big reason why we're here today with this workshop. Understanding customer needs, determining the go-to-market strategy, communicating the value of IoT internally. That's a huge challenge that we see on a regular basis. And finally, defining the role of vendors and partners in the IoT solution. These are all reasons why IoT initiatives don't really work well. So why don't you take a minute, I'll give you a second, look at this list and just kind of reflect on your own experience of why your projects haven't maybe really been as successful as you'd like them to be. Just kind of think and take a note of those 8 that might resonate with you. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in to the Q&A, and throughout today, these will be a good spot to kind of answer some of your questions.
Brian, we do have a question that came in asking, what is product market fit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I kind of briefly mentioned that. Product market fit is this exercise, this process of refining your product until it really hits home with the market. There's quite a bit of literature. If you simply Google product market fit, you'll be overwhelmed with all the resources that are out there. It's a great question. Well, good. Well, hopefully you kind of have those jotted down and keep those in the back of your brain, because you're going to want to come back to these as we go out through the rest of the day. So as you saw, there's a lot of different reasons why something doesn't necessarily work out, and they're not all tech related. A good way to group these things we found is through the 3 lenses of innovation. And this is a very common tool used in the design thinking world. So again, if you Google 3 lenses of innovation, not something we invented. There's reams and reams and reams of material about this. But we really like it. As we do our consulting, it's a really great way to focus in on the 3 important parts of an IoT product. I'll kind of walk you through these if you're not familiar. First of all, there's the user desirability sphere. This is really the value prop. And the key there is do people resonate with that? Is that something your customers care about? So we're going to spend a lot of time in this lens today. The second lens is technical feasibility, and that's as much can you produce something as supporting it. So it's really how do you build and deliver that value prop. You know, we all might like a car that goes 1,000 miles on a gallon of gas. The reality is we really can't deliver that. So you can identify a great value prop, you might not necessarily be able to deliver it. And then finally, we have business viability. This is really about building a compelling, sustainable business model around the value prop, around the user desirability, and around the technical, the desirability and the feasibility. So a good way to think about this is whatever is in the middle of those 3 circles, whatever is in that Venn, so to speak, is really what you should build. And we have a good friend who likes to say at Spin Dance, you know, that almost is what demands to be built. If you've proven that people want it, if you've proven that you can build it, and if you've proven that it's a good business, why in the world would you not move forward with that type of initiative, unless you've got so many you don't know what to choose from? But that's not really the case with a lot of organizations. So we'll be coming back to this way of thinking a few times throughout today. And as we do a lot of consulting, and we kind of talk to people about these 3 spheres, and we ask them, do you have a value prop? Can you build it? Do you have a business model? The number one answer that we hear repeatedly is maybe. The reality is that people don't really take the time to think through this stuff, and they don't have a systematic way of proving this out. And that's really unfortunate because it's not terribly hard. There's a lot of really great processes out there. And really whatever you're going to see today from Spin Dance really builds upon the shoulders of a lot of these great thinkers. So again, your turn. Take a minute here. Think about how confident you are in these three things. Are you confident that you know what your users want? And again, this might not be customers. This might be internal stakeholders. Do you really understand what they desire from your initiative? How confident are you that you can build it? And then third, how confident are you that you can create a successful business around it? And not just from a, hey, we're selling something, but does this create a positive financial return, a positive impact on my organization in general? So take a couple of seconds here and think through those questions.
Hey, Brian, here's another question for you at this time. How do you quantify confidence?
Yeah, that's a good question. So ideally, you have proof at those three areas, those three questions. You've done the legwork, you've done the market research, you went and talked to customers, you've built the prototypes, you have the proof of concept technically, and you're able to stand in front of your boss and your superiors and say, hey, we've proven we've done the legwork, we have the quantifiable and the qualifiable information to move forward with the decision. Yeah, that's a good question. All right, good. So like I said, those three lenses, we're actually going to take most of the time today and talk about this first one, user desirability. Because ultimately, if you don't have user desirability, the other two circles don't really matter. If you don't have something that people care about and are willing to use internally or are willing to buy it from you, it doesn't matter if you can build it, and it doesn't matter if you can build a business model around it. So I want to start with a couple of terms here too as we drill more into this section. And the definition of a value prop, and really there's a lot of them. The one I want to use today, though, I think that'll really serve us is this one. It's the benefits that users can expect from your product or service. Just to put that in contrast with a business model, because sometimes people really kind of conflate these two things. A business model is the plan to take the value proposition to market. So once you've got a value prop, then you're really next up trying to figure out, okay, how do we actually build the rest of the business around that value proposition? Sometimes, and typically this is very, very hard. The value proposition design is incredibly difficult. And every once in a while you run into somebody that kind of almost falls backwards into just such a great value proposition that regardless of how they work on the business side, it's almost like they just succeed despite it themselves. And they have a lot of time to figure it out. I think those are really interesting lessons, just as kind of an aside, but I think it's worth noting here. A couple of really great books on that subject are Anything You Want by Derek Sivers, and he is the creator, the founder of CD Baby, which of course isn't nearly as big as it was maybe a decade ago, but just a fascinating story about a musician who happened upon a really great value proposition and ended up having a great business around it. The second book is The Innovation Stack by Jim McKelvey. I think I'm saying that right. And he's the co-founder of Square, another artist who happened to know a really famous billionaire, Jack Dorsey, of course, from the Twitter company. But again, another fascinating view of finding a value proposition and then kind of building upon that. So really great books. I highly recommend them if you're interested in this area. But I digress. Going back to the value proposition for a second, I want to drill in on the word benefits. And I want to define that just a little bit more. And again, there's a lot of different ways to do it. But today, we're going to focus on three types of benefits. First of all, is just getting the job done. Oftentimes, a value prop is about solving a problem, right? So if I need to hang a piece of art, maybe I'm going to use a hammer, right? I have a job and there's some tools. So the value prop of the hammer is that's going to help me put the nail into the wall. It's that simple. But there's a couple other benefits too. There's positive outcomes that your value prop should create. And then there's also removing negative outcomes. So a negative outcome with a hammer might be hitting myself, in the thumb, which is not desirable at all. So, hanging the nail straight, not hitting myself. If you can invent a hammer that lets me do that, trust me, you're going to be a millionaire. But that should be a quick run through of what those benefits are. And I want to use those specifically because we found them very beneficial. There's another book, a whole series actually from a strategy group, a consultancy out of Europe called Strategizer. And we, again, used their material as a starting point for IoT specific value props. And it's their book here called Value Prop Design. Highly recommend it. I'm going to go through just a couple of things today to give you a little bit of how you would build a general value proposition, and then we're going to go and apply that to IoT. So one of their tools here is called the Value Proposition Canvas. Very simple. There's two parts. On the right, we have the customer segment. This is your user. This is the person that you're creating value for. And there's three parts here. And like I walked through in the previous slide, there's the jobs that they need to accomplish. There's the tasks, the things that they're trying to do as part of their personal life or their professional life. As they're going about trying to complete those jobs, completing those tasks, there's things, again, that they desire. There's gains they hope to achieve. And then there's pains that they hope that they can relieve. So once you've identified that kind of persona, you can use this and then build out your product and service, which is on the left. And of course, we've got the product and services. And those products and services should create gains, and they should be relieving some of those pains. Very simple concept, but probably a little vague. Let me give you kind of an actual example here that I think we can all relate to and build a little bit on the foundation for our afternoon here. So a job that we all have to do, clean the floor. I don't think any of us like to do it, but we got to do it. And pretty simple, the job here is cleaning the floor. It could be vacuuming the carpet, it could be mopping or cleaning the floor by hand. And there's some gains that we want to achieve there. One is a cleaner floor, right? I mean, if we're going to clean it, we want to make sure we do a good job. And ideally, we're doing that in less time, right? This isn't something we all necessarily love to do. So the quicker we can clean, the better. And then, on the pain side, there's a lot of negatives, heavy equipment with a, heavy vacuum cleaner or smelly chemicals. Those are some pains that we want to make sure that we stay away from. So this is the customer segment. It's us. We need to clean the floor. We want to get it cleaner, and we don't want all the downsides of that. So if we're a vacuum company, this is what our product might look like. Clearly, we have a vacuum cleaner that the customer is going to use. And hopefully we have a vacuum cleaner that picks up more dirt. That would be a wonderful gain. The cleaner I can make my floor, the better. And if it's lightweight, that's great. Remember that one of our negatives was heavy equipment. So if we can make a powerful lightweight vacuum cleaner, that's a great thing. So two parts there, and if we put them together, we have a value proposition. And there's a lot more to this. I am simply kind of going through very, very quickly how this works. But ideally, you want to make sure that all your gain relievers, your gain creators, your pain relievers, and your products and services map back to your customer segment. And you want to ideally pick the most important things to focus on because you can't do everything at once. So that's real briefly an overview for a value prop. Why don't you take a minute and spend some time here. I'm actually going to give you a couple of minutes to think about this because this is really setting up the rest of our time together. So why don't you write down the jobs that your user needs to accomplish using your product or your hypothetical situation. Think through a little bit too the positive outcomes that you're trying to create and the negative outcomes that you're hopefully making sure don't happen.
Hey, Brian, we do have another question here. Someone who needs some clarification on the gains and pains. Can you use another example to demonstrate that?
Yeah. Well, let's use this one, oil changing, right? We all got to change the oil in our car. So the job would be changing our oil. Some of us love to kind of wrench on cars, so we might do that ourselves. But a lot of people are going to go to a garage or a shop that's going to do that for us. So that's the job, changing the oil. A gain might be doing that quickly. Again, not a task we all really love to do. And that's why you see a lot of the quick oil changes advertising 10 minutes or less, right? Because they know that one of your gains that you're trying to create is doing that task very quickly. On the pain side, you want to make sure that that job is done right. Changing the oil isn't something that I'm terribly good at, and I want to have confidence that they're doing it correctly. So this is why you often see those types of places have checklists, and that you run in and they're very specific in what they're doing, and they're calling it out, and they might say left check, right check, all that kind of stuff. That's building confidence that they know what they're doing and that you can hear them systematically working through their process. Hopefully that gives you a little bit more info on gains and pains. All right. Well, good. Hopefully you have a couple things written down here. And now that we've gone through this, I want to really start to talk about how do we apply this to IoT. What I just laid out for you is a pretty generic, great, but pretty generic way to build a value proposition. And at SpinDance, we've been thinking about this, and we've developed a couple of tools that we can use to go even deeper on this. So the first thing I want to walk you through is how to identify opportunities to apply IoT, specifically to the jobs that you just jotted down. And there's an observation, I don't know if you ever really thought about this, but almost every job out there that we need to do can be broken into 3 steps. The first step is collecting information, collecting data. Then we need to analyze that data and make a decision. And then we need to take action on that. And it sounds really, really straightforward, but we find a lot of people that really don't decompose their jobs this way. So let me give you a couple of examples here. Back to our cleaning example, one is we need to measure how dirty the floor is, right? Then we need to make a decision. Do I need to clean the floor? Did I just spill something very wet and I got to get the mop, or is it a little dirty and I can clean it up on the weekend? But ultimately, whatever decision we made, we actually need to clean that floor eventually. So that's, again, extending our simple cleaning example. Let me walk you through 2 more here. One is in industrial manufacturing, and this is measuring the state of my equipment, right? I need my equipment to be in tip-top shape if I'm going to produce the best quality product possible. So I need to measure the state of my equipment. I need to decide if I need to perform maintenance on that or not. And then ultimately I need to schedule and get that maintenance performed, either maybe taking the line offline, doing it after hours, whatever that might be, I need to perform the maintenance. On the inventory side, if you're managing an inventory, you need to basically count the number of products you have in your inventory. You need at some point to order more things, and then you actually need to go out and complete that order. So again, this seems incredibly basic, but you'll see in a minute why this is so useful to break down a job into these 3 things of collecting information, making decisions, and taking action. So again, real briefly, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes here. Think through, you identified some jobs. Think through what information you need to accomplish those jobs. Think through the decisions that your users have to make to complete that job, and then finally the actions. And I know it seems incredibly straightforward. I promise it's going to make a little more sense here as we keep moving forward. So take another minute and a half here and jot those 3 things down. Yeah, and it's important too, don't overthink this. It's a good thing to reflect on as a team. In my experience, I think where people spend the least amount of time with IoT is the action part. We're really good at collecting information. We're really good about analysis. We don't really tie that directly back to actions that benefit the user or the individual. So don't skip over that part. We'll give you another 50 seconds here or so. All right, about 15 seconds here. Hopefully you have some good notes here on the information the decisions and the actions. And as you're kind of wrapping that up, I'm going to advance here to the next slide and explain why we had you go through what seems like a really simplistic exercise here. The takeaway, the really interesting thing about IoT is that each of these three things, collecting information, doing analysis, and taking action, can be executed in a spectrum ranging from totally manual, the humans doing all of it, to totally automated, where the machines are taking care of it. And then there's kind of a middle ground there of assisting, where the human and the machine, the computer, are working together. So let me walk you through what this might be. So in a totally manual scenario here, cleaning might look like this. I'm going to eyeball it, right? I'm just going to look down at the floor and see if it's dirty. And I'm going to use my human judgment if I need to clean it, and maybe I'm going to get down on my hands and knees and do it, and I'm not going to use any other tools. That's the most manual version of that. Then we can start to think about how we can assist people in this. And maybe I'm going to, you ever seen that in the military or shows where you might use a cloth or like a white glove and wipe your hand over something and look and kind of start to measure the dust. That's a very kind of trivial example of using a cloth to see how dirty something is. From an assist perspective, it could be as simple as we're just going to use a schedule, right? That decision of cleaning we're going to take out of the human's control entirely. And if you're a restaurant or something like that, you've seen that, last cleaned by so-and-so on that clipboard in the back of the door there. That's an example where they're just using a schedule to make sure that the cleaning gets happen. And then again, maybe I'm going to use a mop. So instead of doing it by hand, I'm going to use a tool of some sort. On the far end of this, we can totally automate this. Maybe we're going to have a robot, we're going to use computer vision, and we're going to go through and we're going to measure how dirty stuff is. Maybe we're going to use in an industrial format, we've done this a few times, where we track how dirty the machines are with sensors, and then we dispatch people to clean that after the fact, which can be a great way to utilize and maximize a limited amount of human resources. Or we're going to totally clean it with a robot, and we're going to have our vacuum cleaner just go out and clean stuff. But again, you can see there's this spectrum of manual and assisted and automation. And what you can do then is apply IoT to each of these jobs, and really the benefit of IoT at a very, very high level is shifting manual work to assisted work and shifting assisted work to automated work. And so what we can do is actually plot this onto a very simple 3x3 chart and use this as a way to brainstorm how we can leverage automation and IoT to assist with these jobs that our users need to accomplish. So again, we have collect, analyze, and take action down on the rows, and then we've got manual, assisted, and automated there. And again, we can take our different parts of our task, plot them, and say, okay, how can I move this to the right? How can I take a manual process that our users don't really like doing and provide assistance in that? Or maybe even take it a step further, how can I totally automate that process? And it doesn't have to be all three things. And that's an important takeaway too. Sometimes it's simply enough to improve the collection or improve the decision making, or, and this is really where it's very valuable, improve the action. If you can totally take that action away from the humans, it's really great. So take a minute, it's your turn, take 2 minutes here, and you thought through the data collection and the analysis and the action steps. How can you, in what you're trying to do with IoT, move all that stuff to the right? Take a few minutes and think about that.
Hey, Brian, we do have another question that's come in asking if you could further explain assist versus automation.
Yeah, sure, Marcy. Well, I think a car is a good example. So cars in the olden days, 100 years ago, everything was manual, right? It was no power brakes, no power steering, no power doors. You even had to get out and crank the car to start it. And over the last 100, 120 years or so, the automobile manufacturers have been slowly adding assistance to that. So now I have power steering, and I have all these other ways of simplifying the driving experience. And adding GPS as an example of navigation, assisting navigation. Of course, over the next 10 and 20 years, they're going to totally automate that. So I just have to get in the car and it's actually going to navigate and drive itself totally. So that's hopefully another example for how that whole process is kind of evolving.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. All right, we got another 30 seconds here. Think about how you can help your people, help your users. Great. All right, wrapping down here. All right. So this 3x3 chart is a great way to kind of break your problem down and start to brainstorm. It's not a great tool though to describe to other people what your value prop actually is. So for that, there's another tool that we've kind of created. It's a one-page IoT value proposition, and I want to walk you through that next. And this is really where the fun starts to come in. It's a very simple chart here again, but it really kind of outlines the outcome, the actions, the model, which I'll explain in more detail in a second, and the data collection. And this is really where everything starts to come together. To describe this, I want to use, again, I'm going to stick with the cleaning analogy, stick with a robot here. And let's say that you're the product owner for a robot, and that you have an idea here for the robot to not only clean, but to detect how dirty the carpet is, and if there's spots, and use that information to tell the human if they should schedule a carpet cleaning. And there's a lot of business value for doing something like that. But we'll use that as our hypothetical here. And the outcome, the benefit, the job is to schedule carpet cleaning. We're going to do that through just-in-time carpet cleaning notifications. The actions here are, again, a combination between the machine and the human. The machine, the robot's going to go through and say, oh, you know what, Brian, I found new spots, and you have a spot over here that's getting dirty and dirtier, and I just can't clean it up. It's probably time for some cleaning. So it's going to send me a notification, and then I'm going to actually schedule the cleaning. The robot's not going to just randomly go hire someone, but they're going to tell me, hey, it's time to go clean your carpets. The machine needs a model. It needs a way for it to actually understand how dirty the floor is. And this is where a couple of different techniques can come into play. This could be like a very simple heuristic, could be an algorithm, could be an actual machine learning model. It really kind of doesn't matter, but there's some sort of model in the IoT device or in the cloud that's looking at the data and kind of providing some direction for the action. And then finally, we have the data that we need to collect here. So maybe there's a dirt sensor, there's some spot detection, some cleaning schedule, etc. You've just laid out very, very quickly a one-page IoT value prop. And now you can look down at this and share this with a bunch of people. And this is a really great tool for a couple of different reasons here. It really kind of connects all the dots, first of all, right? So if we have an outcome, we really have to understand the actions that are going to lead and generate that outcome. So that's why we started at the top, and then we list the actions. And then our model, we get to think through how that really is going to inform the machine or the human to take action there. And if that part is a little confusing to you, just maybe think about what are the whats and the whens and the whys and the hows. There's always a lot of questions about what action do I take? When do I take the action? How do I take it? A really good model will inform one or more of those questions. And then finally, the data is what we give to that model, and that data needs to be available and it needs to be cost effective. So oftentimes we see people just collecting a whole bunch of data and they have no idea what they're going to do with it. This type of exercise helps you draw a straight line from the data that you're collecting through the algorithm that you're going to use to leverage that data into the action, and then finally out to the outcome. So it's a really great way to get your entire team on board and kind of connect all the dots. So again, your turn. Take a few minutes, we've done all the legwork of kind of thinking through how you can assist someone here. So hopefully you've got some raw ideas, but take a few minutes, think about an outcome, and then kind of work backwards and say, okay, what's the action, what's the model, and then what's some of the data that you need. And we'll give you a couple of minutes to kind of do that.
Brian, we do have another question here asking if you can further describe the model a little bit more. Looks like maybe there's still a little confusion about the model, if you can expand on that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, Marcy. That's oftentimes, unfortunately, people, excuse me, they don't really think about that model. They think about the data, they think about the device, but they often outsource that model to software developers or somebody else, and that's unfortunate because that's really, in a lot of ways, the key to the whole thing. The model is just a way to make decisions. It's what would be a good example here? Well, again, if I need to change my oil, the model, I have a model in my car, right? It might be the change oil light comes on. And it's just keeping track of when's the last time that you changed your oil. So a model doesn't have to be complex, but it is kind of the key, it's the linchpin for really taking the data and doing something with it. So a lot of people focus on the data. I think it's much more important to focus on the model and the decision-making process that's connecting the data with the decisions and the actions.
Thanks, Brian.
You bet. All right, 30 seconds here. Keep jotting those ideas down. All right, as we're kind of wrapping up here, I'm going to bring it back to this slide. Remember, we were talking about those 3 lenses of innovation. And once you have that one-page IoT value proposition, you can actually use it to start to answer some of the questions about the desirability and the feasibility. So how does that come in? So once you've got your plan, you can start to talk to people internally, your engineers, the people on the ground that really know the space well, talk to your customers. And you can start to make sure, first and foremost, that this is the right outcome, right? Maybe people at the end of the day don't care about, carpet cleaning, and you thought it was a great outcome and really not. Well, you can tear this up. You don't have to spend any more time on this. Or maybe they're like, oh yeah, I really like what you're saying, but if you just made it a little bit better, you're now designing on paper and you're able to kind of really iterate very quickly. The outcome might be great, but maybe you want to solicit some more feedback on the actions. Are those the right actions? Maybe there's a better way to clean the carpet or schedule the carpet or something like that. And you're able to kind of get some feedback on that. There's a fundamental question of, can we build a model? Is there a better model? Is there a way that we can tweak this? And what I love about these one-page business plans is you can take this to the engineers and they see the big picture. They suddenly understand what you're trying to do and they say, oh yeah, no, I know exactly how to do that. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Or maybe they're going to give you a little bit of feedback and say, well, I think if you tweak your model a little bit, you're going to be in a better spot. And then finally, we can collect all that data and you can understand how much it's going to cost. So again, you start to see how it can refine the value proposition, the user desirability, and start to zero in on the technical feasibility, and it can be really useful. As an aside, this is also a really cool tool to help justify the cost of data. A lot of people want to collect the data. They really don't know how to justify the return on investment there. Well, if you know what data you have to collect and you can start to value the outcome, you suddenly have a really easy way of describing the value of your data and the return on the investment of collecting that data. So that's our one-page value proposition. If you've hung in there with us, thank you very much. I think that's going to give you a good starting point for refining your own initiative. But again, we've got to wrap that up in a great business model. So I want to, in the time we have left here, talk about that a little bit. And of course, this was coming with a title like Show Me the Money. At some point, you can have a great value proposition, but you got to bring that in and really prove that you can build a business around it. So you got the value prop, but at some point, someone's going to say, great, but show me the money. How is this going to help us? So again, it's really about taking the value proposition to market. And to do that, there's obviously a lot of different ways to do that. Again, I like to go back to Strategizer, and they have a wonderful one-page business canvas. Maybe you've recognized this. There's a lot of variations of this. But what we've just been talking about for the last couple of minutes is really focused around two of these boxes, the value proposition and the customer segment. And all these other boxes systematically help you build out the rest of the business plan. We don't have time to go through all of them. I would really love to. They are all really important. So I encourage you to go research this a little bit more. But in the time we have left, I want to focus on the value creation, the actual monetization of this and the revenue streams. So what are some IoT revenue models? And there's three kind of patterns, and I'm going to drill into that a little bit more. The first revenue model is a product. This is a fixed one-time transaction. Historically, we've done a lot of work with Whirlpool over the years, and last year we had a lot of fun building a connected grill. Great IoT products. The value prop, the business model there is basically raise the price and sell more product. It's a feature in a lot of ways. So that's a one-time transaction. The second model is a service, and this is a fixed ongoing transaction. So an example of that, I think a lot of us are familiar with the streaming models, right? Whether I watch 0 hour of Netflix or 1,000 hours of Netflix, I'm spending the same amount of money. Peloton is a good example of that as well. Once you buy the bike, you get the subscription, and it's a fixed ongoing transaction at various levels. The third model is an outcome. This is where it's a variable ongoing transaction based on performance or consumption. So in the non-technical world, our financial planners are often using this model. The more money they make for us in the market, the more money they make for themselves. Don't have time to go into it today, but John Deere is really good at this type of model too, of applying a variable outcome model that really aligns the economic outcomes for the farmers with their outcomes. And you can mix and match these. It's not like you need to pick one. There's lots of different variations and combinations of all this. So to drill down into this, because those are kind of genres of revenue models, I want to give you a couple more specific ones here. First are higher prices. Again, you're selling a product, but you're just adding IoT as a feature and you're raising the price. On the service side and the outcome side, there can be some sort of subscription. With Peloton, again, you are having an ongoing fee. I don't have a Peloton, I have a treadmill, but there's a monthly and annual fee that we have for that. Could be a contract. Maybe it's not a subscription, but maybe you're selling industrial equipment and you're wrapping that with a service contract to create recurring revenue to help the customer with something. Replenishment, that's another very common example. Maybe you have a smart coffee maker, or maybe there's some consumable in your industrial product and you're keeping count of that and you're automatically reordering that for the customer when the time is right. Asset sharing, this is kind of the reverse of a subscription, where, if you're selling energy back to the grid, this would be an example of where you're sharing your asset, your energy, maybe you've got solar panels, you're sharing that asset to create revenue. Pay per use is another outcome. Those smart scooters that you see in big cities would be an example of this, where there's no subscription, you're not buying the scooter, you're paying for the amount of time that you're using it to get across town. That's a pay per use. And then finally, and this is one I don't think a lot of people spend a lot of time on, enabling IoT services, enabling non-IoT services. So where we live in West Michigan, there's a lot of furniture manufacturers. I happen to be about 5 miles from where they make the Herman Miller Aeron chair. And a lot of the large furniture manufacturers like Herman Miller are providing space planning services. So if you're a big company and you want to buy new furniture, they'll come in and they'll do a space study and a time study and help you figure out how to use your space and the right furniture to buy. Increasingly, these companies are using IoT devices to go in and understand traffic flow and how the space is being used over a longer period of time. And they're using that to make the recommendations. So they're not selling IoT per se, they're using it to sell more product. And I think this is a really interesting opportunity for a lot of IoT where it's augmenting very non-techie services to improve the outcome. So again, take a few minutes here. Think about what business models might fit with your product. If you don't sell a product, don't worry. We have a couple more slides here at the end. But if you do sell a product, take a minute, think about what categories might apply to your product.
Hey, Brian, we do have another question here asking whether or not you need to pick a single revenue model or if you can mix and match the revenue models.
It depends. Yeah, really, I think the best way, I love that question. It's really, don't try to zero in too quickly. I think once you got a good value prop, keep an open mind with the ways that you can monetize that. So there might be mixing and matching. There might be 3 or 4 options that you put together. And through your market research and through the conversations with your customers, you're going to drill in on 1 or 2 that you really like, and you can pilot those and really bring the best one to market. Yeah, I like that question. So again, take another minute, think through that, and then we'll kind of shift gears into the ROI side of things internally. All right, another 30 seconds here. By the way, there's a lot of good articles on this. We've kind of taken from a bunch of them to kind of create this slide. But yeah, if you're really stuck, yeah, by all means, go out and research this a little bit more. Perfect. Well, we got about 9 seconds left. Hope you're wrapping up there. As we're doing that, I'm going to keep moving here and talk about how you can use this type of model internally. Because the reality is we don't think about that, but oftentimes our big technical initiatives internally are almost like a little mini business model that we have to get right. So we're often focused on the technology, but that's not the right perspective. We really need to think about all these boxes. And in a lot of ways, instead of thinking about revenue, we need to think about cost savings and ROI. And so I want to walk you through that real briefly. And again, there's a lot of ways to do this. One of my favorite is from Amazon Web Services. And they have a couple of really great presentations on how you can use IoT to improve your internal operations. And there's kind of 5 main areas here: productivity, which is improving labor productivity, obviously; quality, reducing scrap, material overuse, etc.; availability, downtime, utility costs, energy and water, etc.; and then finally, safety. By the way, we often think about this with industrial IoT. At Spindance, we're involved with medical and retail and agriculture and a lot of other things. Almost every customer I talk to, one of these 5 things applies. This is much more than just industrial machinery type situations. So we could spend a lot of time here, obviously. I just want to give you a quick example using productivity. And some of you, this is going to you're going to roll your eyes. It's so simple. But if you haven't done this before, I wanted to give you an example of what you could do. And there's really just a couple of sets of numbers that you need to kind of identify here: your baseline costs, the improvements of what your initiative, your IoT product, are going to bring. From that, you can kind of generate the difference, the delta, and then you can use that to generate a pretty classic ROI calculation. So why don't we do that a little bit more concretely here? So let's say that you have a factory and you're adding some IoT device to improve productivity. And the baseline, it takes 10 hours per shift at $40 an hour, loaded costs. And so some activity costs about $400 to produce. Assuming there's 3 shifts, that equals out to about $1,200 a day. Let's say you're introducing some IoT devices to really improve the productivity, and you're able to do what used to take 10 hours now in 8.5 hours. So your cost now goes from 400 down to 340, and over 3 shifts, your cost now goes to just over $1,000 a day. That's a 15% improvement, which is pretty good. Typically, 5, 10, 15%, that's not bad. Sometimes you get lucky and it's 20 and maybe even 40% productivity improvements. From this, we'd actually generate our return over a longer period of time. So 1,200 take away 1,020, that's $180 in value that we're creating a day. Spread that over a year. I'm figuring, 3 shifts, 5 days a week, 50 hours a year, excuse me. That's about $45,000 in value that your initiative creates. Now, if that costs us $1,000, or excuse me, $100,000, this is the calculation. So 45,000 times 3 gets us 135. And this is just kind of a very classic way to calculate an ROI. And this gets us to a 3-year ROI, because again, $45,000 times 3, that gets us to 35% ROI over 3 years. I picked 3 years because that's where a lot of controllers and CFOs, that's the starting point. You might be able to spread that out over to 5 years, and if they tend to be unrealistic, they're going to ask for 2-year ROI. But in general, you want to aim for a 3-year ROI. So again, this is just one quick example of how you can calculate the value that you're going to generate and the ROI for that. So again, last time here, I'm going to ask you to do this, but take a few minutes. If you have an internal initiative that you're responsible for, just jot down which of these 5 things you think are going to apply, and then spend some time thinking through how you might measure that. That's really kind of key. What's that baseline? How are you going to measure the before and after of your IoT initiative? And then what's a good ROI? A lot of people don't really know what that is, and maybe you don't. That's where it's a good question. Go talk to your CFO or your controller. Well, good. All right, last time, 1 minute and 25 seconds. Just a quick comment too. Really, the best initiatives cover multiple opportunities here. So they don't just improve productivity, but they also improve quality and availability. So it's worth going through and thinking through and quantifying the value for each one of these things. All right, good. About 20, 25 seconds here. Perfect. All right, well, that really covers the bulk of the material that we had for you today. Just a quick recap. Again, products and initiatives fail because they don't really have the right mix of user desirability, technical feasibility, and or business viability. So if you struggle to get traction, go back to the drawing board, look at the 3 lenses of innovation. Do you have the proof that you need in those 3 lenses? Again, a good strong value proposition on the desirability side is going to really identify the jobs, the pains, and the gains that your users are dealing with. So again, if you really don't understand what your user does, what they're trying to accomplish, you really don't understand what they're hoping to accomplish, the gains, the oh man, that would be wonderful kind of moments, and or you don't really understand the pain points that they're dealing with, you really aren't in a good position to identify a great value prop. So get out of the office, go talk to people. In terms of an IoT specific value proposition, it should really be focused on understanding the data that you need to collect, the information, the decision-making process, and the actions, and build your solution in such a way that you can create value there. And of course, a good value prop isn't enough. Go research that 1-page business plan. Even if it's an internal initiative, it's a great way to organize your thoughts and understand all the resources that you're going to need. Well, thank you again. Hopefully this was beneficial. Hopefully this moved you forward in some way. We'd love to talk to you. We'd be happy to customize a value proposition workshop for your organization. Or if you're just interested in training and consulting or other software services for connected product, you can reach us at hello@spindance.com and check out our website at spindance.com. And we're actually going to give away a free value proposition consultation right now. So in just a second, a poll is going to pop up on your screen. If you're interested, check that out, and we'll be in touch with you if you win in the near future. So go ahead and fill that out. All right, perfect. And we've got a couple minutes left here. So we do have some time for a final few Q&A. If you have any, feel free to drop them in the tool, and we'll try to get to as many as we can here in the last 4 or 5 minutes.
Thanks, Brian. Great presentation. We do have a couple questions that have come in here. I'll try and get to as many of these as I can. The first one is, it feels like a lot of extra work. How long does it take to do this in real life?
It's a good question. It can be a lot of work, but the reality is, if you don't know you're going to be successful, if you haven't proven it to yourself, is it wasted work? I'd say it's really foundational work. It's going to save you a lot of money on the back end of a project. In terms of how long it takes, it can really vary. Weeks, months. We've seen some efforts like this be very structured and take 6 months, but it doesn't have to be that big. I mean, even a little bit of legwork on your part's going to be well worth it.
Great. Next question is, my company is risk averse to experimenting with business models. Any advice?
Yeah, that's a toughie. We see that a lot, especially with fairly conservative manufacturers who are getting into this for the first time. Again, proof really helps. If you can take this to customers and you can get some buy-in, you might not be able to move the entire organization overnight, but at least you can start to plant those seeds. And the reality is, it really is hard to pull this off. For a company that only sells product, to get into a recurring revenue type of situation, there's a lot that goes into that. There's accounting and legal and a bunch of things. So it's just not as simple as snapping your finger. But it's really worth the effort to jumpstart the conversation. We've seen some traditional manufacturers who are much more lucrative now because they've kind of taken the efforts to kind of just brainstorm and diversify the way that they capture money.
Great. Next question is, we use a different product development methodology. Do you think these methods will work with our process?
Oh yeah, I think so. It you know, like the 3 lenses of innovation, there's a lot of different ways that product design and design thinking can evolve. It's really, I think, back to, again, proving to yourself that you have the right information to move forward. And I do like the desirability and the technical feasibility and the business viability. I think if you're not covering at least those 3 bases, you're probably off base. But I'm not hung up at all that there's a specific way you have to go about proving that to yourself.
Great, thanks, Brian. Another question here is, we don't have a dedicated product development group. What would you recommend in that situation?
Just dive in. Honestly, like, people think this is hard stuff, and it's not. It just takes practice, like everything else. So again, with the internet and with the number of books and resources out there, you can go pick up a $20 Udemy course. You know, you pick up some books here, and you start gradually adopting that. You don't need to have a dedicated product group. You just need a boss that trusts you in a little bit of time, and you can get really, really far in that type of situation.
Great, thanks, Brian. I think that's all we're going to have time for today for questions. You want to do a recap and close us out?
Yeah, again, thank you very much. I want to thank IoT Central here for giving us this platform in this hour today. I really do hope this has benefited you. Again, if you want to get a hold of us, you can reach us at hello@spindance.com. So I think with that, we're going to wrap it up. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and that this gave you some really good food for thought as you kind of move forward on your IoT journey. So